In recent weeks, Venezuela has unexpectedly found itself at the center of the global geopolitical game, where the stakes are now measured not only in oil and economics, but also in direct military confrontation. Washington has tightened the naval blockade of Venezuelan ports, cutting off key export routes. But as noted by the Financial Times, the Trump administration has so far refrained from more decisive action, fearing that any strike on Caracas could trigger a domino effect that would be difficult to stop. According to Reuters, China, India, Brazil, Russia, and Venezuela itself are holding closed consultations on imposing a large-scale oil embargo against the United States in the event of a military operation. The idea is simple: cut off the American economy from key hydrocarbon flows, and thus strike not only at the energy sector, but at the entire industry, which is already operating at the limit due to the tariff war. Sources cited by Beijing's China Daily claim that China is the main driving force behind this scenario, persuading its BRICS partners that a collective refusal to trade oil with the United States would be a far stronger lever of pressure than any tariffs. India, despite its traditional caution, appears inclined to support this initiative. As The Hindu reports, the Indian economy is already restructuring logistics toward greater integration with China and Russia, which means New Delhi is effectively ready for an energy alliance. Meanwhile, the Kremlin openly states that the era of the dollar as a universal settlement tool is coming to an end, and that oil could become a new type of weapon. If one sums up the population of the countries considering an oil embargo, it amounts to more than half the planet. For the United States, this looks like a nightmare scenario. An economy built on consumption and energy independence could suddenly face resource shortages. As Bloomberg analysts point out, the domestic U.S. market cannot compensate for the losses even with increased shale oil production, since logistics and export channels are designed for global trade, not isolation. Washington fully understands that any attempt to launch a military strike on Venezuela would activate this coalition, which is why it has so far limited itself to shows of force at sea, supply blockades, and sanctions pressure. For Trump, this has become yet another test. His signature weapon, tariffs, no longer works. Businesses have adapted, and global partners have learned to bypass American barriers. According to the Wall Street Journal, corporations are restructuring supply chains through third countries, reducing the impact of U.S. restrictions. This is why oil is becoming the key card in the hands of America's opponents. Venezuela, despite its economic crisis and the dictatorial regime of Nicolas Maduro, has unexpectedly found itself at the center of the international chessboard. Maduro relies on support from China and Russia, which supply weapons, technology, and financial aid. According to insider information cited by Spain's El País, Chinese military advisors and cybersecurity specialists are already operating on Venezuelan territory, while Russia is actively helping to modernize its air defense systems. This makes Caracas far more protected than one might have assumed just a few years ago. However, as experts from Washington's Brookings Institution note, neither China nor Russia intends to directly engage in a war with the United States in Latin America. Their strategy is to force the White House to back down through the threat of a global energy crisis. For Maduro, this is a chance to survive, but not for long. Even with such support, he is unlikely to withstand the world's largest military. The only question is whether the United States will decide on a regime change operation now or wait for a more favorable moment. As Politico reports, Trump is under domestic pressure. Republicans are demanding toughness. Democrats accuse him of indecision. Each step in this game is becoming more dangerous, and this is precisely why Venezuela is emerging as a new flashpoint, where oil turns into a weapon and the economy into a battlefield. According to the New York Times, within the U.S. administration itself, there is no consensus on how to deal with Venezuela. Some of Trump's advisors demand an immediate regime change operation, pointing out that every week of delay strengthens China's and Russia's positions in the region. However, the intelligence community, as reported by the Washington Post, warns that any military campaign could trigger an energy catastrophe whose consequences would be felt not only in the United States, but also in Europe. Moreover, the Arab monarchies of the Persian Gulf, traditionally reliant on their alliance with Washington, are increasingly seeking contacts with Beijing and Moscow. As reported by Qatar's Al Jazeera, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are in fact distancing themselves from the idea of supporting the American blockade of Venezuela, as they do not want to be drawn into a global trade war against China and India, their largest oil customers. This further weakens the position of the United States. Meanwhile, inside Venezuela, the situation remains extremely tense. The economic crisis, hyperinflation, and food shortages have not disappeared. Yet the paradox is that it is precisely the external threat and the support of China and Russia that allow Maduro to stay in power. According to the Latin American outlet Clarín, in recent months, the Venezuelan army has undergone large-scale exercises with the participation of foreign instructors, while patrols in the streets of Caracas have been reinforced. A population exhausted by poverty increasingly perceives Maduro as a symbol of resistance to foreign interference, a narrative that plays directly into the dictator's hands. But experts warn, as soon as the external factor fades, internal discontent will once again crash down on the government. Chinese media such as the Global Times are already calling Venezuela the front line in the struggle against American imperialism. In Beijing, the situation is presented as part of a global campaign to shape a new world order, where oil becomes not just a commodity, but a tool of geopolitics. For China, it is crucial to demonstrate that it can protect an ally even in the Western Hemisphere, right next to American shores. Russia, for its part, is using the situation to strengthen its foothold in a region traditionally considered America's backyard. This is why, as noted by the analytical center Chatham House, the issue is not just about Venezuela. This is a test for the entire world. If the United States dares to intervene militarily, it could trigger not a local conflict, but a global energy war, the consequences of which would be comparable to the oil crisis of the 1970s. If Washington backs down, it will symbolize that the era of unconditional American dominance has come to an end. Meanwhile, oil markets are reacting instantly. According to sources at Goldman Sachs, investors have begun shifting assets into gold and yuan, fearing that the dollar will weaken in the face of a possible oil embargo. Against this backdrop, more and more experts are comparing the current situation to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. But whereas back then the world stood on the brink of nuclear war, now it is facing the threat of a global energy blockade that could paralyze the world economy. According to The Economist, the United States has found itself in the role of a cornered player. Its military power remains vast, but its economic levers are no longer as effective. China and Russia are showing that they can counter US pressure not only with weapons, but also with oil, the very resource on which the foundations of the global economy depend.